This is Stanford University.
Juniors.
Beautiful. Good afternoon. I'd like to call today's SubCmte hearing to order, just for the public's information and those viewing on Cal Channel. This is the week before spring break, and so it's a very busy week in terms of public policy committees. We've got SubCmte members who are presenting an education committee. Education committee has 20 or 30 bills on the docket. The Labor Committee is meeting, and so members will be in and out. I'm going to go ahead and get started as a committee of one, just to honor all of you who've come to join us and the department, to try to keep us as close to being on time and on agenda as possible. Today's hearing on the Department of Developmental Services is critical, as it provides the only scheduled opportunity for the administration to comprehensively present prior to the May revise on a budget that has experienced significant change over the past several budget cycles, with real impacts felt by consumers in need of services and support. Our expectation today is that the department present at the outset on the landscape of developmental disability or DD services, the state of the current state of affairs with regard to services being provided by the department, given the numerous past policy and budget changes. It will just give us all a sense of the current status quo as we go forward with today's conversation. The agenda lays out topics for our discussion, and I know the public and stakeholders are anxious to hear about the formula the administration has developed with regard to the trigger cuts. It will have that opportunity to hear them report back on the subject of stakeholder meetings, and all the other information they'd like to share with us on the triggers. Public comment will be taken as specified in the agenda once after the developmental center issues, again after community services issues, and one final opportunity for those who have not testified under the subject of the trigger reductions. So we're really going to ask that you kind of self-police, if you will, and not come up on repeated issues. If there's one particular issue in those three areas you wanted to focus your public comments, come up during that time. You know our unofficial rules of the committee. We ask that people not applaud out loud, but that we borrow a word, if you will, or a motion from American Sign Language, and we applaud by the ASL sign. And so we ask that you not applaud or shout out, but if you want to show your support for something someone has said, to use the sign language sign for applause. We have 4 vote-only items for the subcommittee to act on, and we will take these up when we have reached a full quorum. We would like to acknowledge the attendance of some special guests who are visiting Sacramento. Of course, DD consumers and your families. There are a group of students visiting us from Stanford University's Alternative Spring Break program on women's issues. So we want to acknowledge your presence. I can't say that I would have been sitting through a budget subcommittee when I was on spring break when I was your age. So I acknowledge your commitment to public policy, and hopefully one day I can vote for you for governor. How about that? Beautiful. With that, thank you for joining us, Mr. Monning and Mr. Chesborough. We'll go ahead and get started with the Department of Developmental Services. Issue number 1, we welcome the director. Thank you. As you all are getting seated, I'll have roll call so we can establish a quorum, please.
Mitchell?
Here.
Chesborough? Here. Grove? Mansour? Monning?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Delgadillo used to have sent me the memo. This is clearly the blue suit day. I would have coordinated to show my support. I think they all adjust, just so you're comfortable. No problem. Again, thank you very much, and we'll start. Again, as I said in my intro, give you the opportunity to provide us with some background. We're really very interested in kind of a status quo. We've tried to, over the the course of this budget season, kind of adjust and modify our agenda as a subcommittee to really give us as members, and we have a new member of the committee, the opportunity to really kind of understand the status quo of what's going on with the departments, so we have that background as a committee as we go forward trying to make decisions on behalf of California residents. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members, and thank you for having us today. Sorry, I'm shuffling around a little bit. I couldn't see my binder. So I am, as you know, for those in the audience, Terry Delgadillo. I'm the Director of the Department of Developmental Services, and DDS provides services to about 252,000 individuals with developmental disabilities throughout our state. The services are provided under the Lanterman Act entitlement, and with that, there are 21 regional centers that oversee services that are provided in the community. We do still operate 5 state facilities, 4 developmental centers, and 1 community program. And as of last Wednesday, we had 1,737 people residing in our facilities. The budget that was enacted for 2011-12 was $4.6 billion, $2.6 billion general fund. The governor's budget for January has adjustments of $157.2 million in the current year. $100 million is associated with the revenue trigger that was pulled last fall by the Department of Finance, which reduces our budget in the current year by $100 million. And later in the agenda, I'll go over how the department is achieving that. The other change in the current year is primarily associated with the settlement for the adult day health care centers. In our budget, when it was passed last July, the determination was that the adult day health care centers were going to end and that we would pick up the costs of serving people who are in our system that got that service. With the settlement, all of the people in our system are being served under the new program, so our budget's reduced accordingly. The proposed budget for 12-13 is $4.7 billion total funds, $2.7 billion general fund. And that's $218 million increase over the revised current year. It includes a $200 million trigger, which is the annualized amount of the trigger from the current year. It also includes $158 million, assuming that the 4.25% payment reduction, which we'll talk about later in the agenda, that would end on June 30th of this year. It is scheduled in statute to end. The budget assumes that it would. It also includes $24.5 million reductions in developmental center staffing and $162.6 million in caseload increase to adjust for new caseload coming into our system. Just as that was an overview of the budget, but the committee asked that we talk about what's happened the last few years and what the impact has been. So in response to that, starting in about 2008-9, the department had a number of very significant budget reductions. They included rate freezes, the freeze on negotiated rates, and we went through several years, which I'll talk more about, of very significant reductions, close to $1 billion in general fund cuts. When we look back at the 10 years prior to the last 4 years, the 10 years prior, we were growing at 16.8% in our budget, and our caseload was growing at about 5.3%. And so we were definitely outpacing caseload growth. In the last 4 years, our budget is basically flat. We're growing at a minus 0.1%. Caseload has been growing at about 3%. So it's been a complete shift from where we were 4 years ago. Caseload now, this year, we're expected to grow at about 2.7%. I think the changes in caseload are associated with a number of things. One is we changed eligibility for our Early Start program, and so we're seeing less babies come in. Another very significant thing, I think, is the birth rate, and we're seeing that in a lot of different programs with the birth rate down. So is the entry into our program down. Other big changes we're seeing are changes in consumer characteristics. We're seeing an increase, a continued increase in diagnosis of individuals with autism. It's about 25% of our population now, so that as well has been going up. We're seeing an increase in individuals with dual diagnosis. That's about 14% of our population. We're seeing an increase in involvement with the criminal justice system. And we are also seeing, on a positive side, an increase of people who are living at home, either with their families or living in their own home. The reliance on the developmental centers has gone down. In the last 5 years, there's been a 38% decrease in the population at the developmental centers. We've closed both Agnew's Developmental Center and Sierra Vista Community Facility, and as you know, we'll talk about today, we're in the process of closing Lanterman Developmental Center. We've developed some new models with the help of Senator Chesborough at the time. We have a new program we refer to as the SB 962 homes, which is also later in the agenda, that's been very helpful in providing services to individuals that have been in the developmental center sometimes a very, very long period of time who have enduring medical needs. And so that's been very helpful in the closure of Agnew's, and we just had the first resident placed in a 962 home with the closure of Lanterman. With all of that, as I mentioned before, obviously we're having significant increase in individuals with behavioral and criminal justice involvement. We do have some new types of homes in the community that are serving them. One thing that we are seeing, and we'll talk more about later in the agenda, is use of facilities like mental health type facilities that are not eligible for federal matching funds. So as we look at our triggers and how we save money, we've been working with our stakeholders to try to identify ways that we might be able to serve them maybe better or at least comparable and in a way that we could achieve federal funds. I think as we look back over the last few years, again, there's been about $1 billion in general fund cuts. That doesn't take into account the additional federal funds where we might have drawn them down had we had the expenditures. People have been impacted system-wide. The consumers have been impacted. They've been impacted because their eligibility has been changed, in particular as it relates to the Early Start program. The services have been limited. A couple of years ago, we suspended the social recreation services. We also suspended camping, except in limited cases. We also put a cap on certain types of respite. Families have been impacted because they've had increase in their fees. They've had increase in parental fees if their child lives out of home. They've had increase in family cost participation if their child gets daycare, respite, or camp. And last year we put into place a parental fee. We've also increased parental responsibility and participating in particular in the area of behavioral services and participating in other programming. The providers have been impacted. They've been impacted significantly. They've had, many of them have had rate freezes that go back to the late 90s, the early 2000s. When you look at some, in particular, some of the residential facilities, they've been frozen that long. So it's not even just the current rate freezes. In addition to that, we used to have a negotiated rate, which still exists today, but we capped what those rates could be. That happened a couple years ago. In the last three, including this year, the last 3 years, we have had a payment reduction for providers. It started in February of 2009. It was a 3% payment reduction that was temporary. In 2010, it became a 4.25% payment reduction that continues today, again, on our agenda. I think it's had a significant impact on providers. We can talk more when we get to the agenda item about how people have dealt with that. On the regional center side, there's been a significant increase in responsibilities. Their money has been capped as well, and they've had the 4.25% payment reduction. And a number of things have changed. One of the good things is we've been able to obtain a lot of additional federal funds. Matter of fact, yesterday our $1 billion waiver was approved by the federal government for another 5 years. So we're really, really excited about that. And we're working with them still on the 1915I, but they've been given way on some additional services. So we're really happy about that as well. But coming with that is an extensive amount of additional workload. Also last year there were a number of reforms that were adopted related to having to do with accountability. That impacted both the providers and it impacted the regional centers and their ability to provide services. As a result, one of the things that we're seeing the regional centers, in addition to furloughs and some closure days, we're also seeing clearly caseload issues, which impacts the families as well. At the developmental centers, again, we've had closures, we had staffing reductions, we've had reductions in operating expenses, and we have also capped intake behind the fence at Porterville for people that are involved with the criminal justice system, which is creating some backup pressure in the jails. And at headquarters as well, we've had less staff. We have less staff today than we had 20 years ago, and the program's grown 400%. So all of us, I think, throughout the entire system have been impacted by what has has occurred. I have to say I'm most fortunate to be the director of this department and have a system that has pulled together, even though it's been very, very difficult. I think we've gotten through. I do think the system, though, is very strained at this point, and I think it's going to be very difficult to continue. That's why we recommended the sunset of the 4.25% payment reduction. We are challenged to come up with the $200 million in the budget reduction still. We've worked, and we'll talk more about that with our community, and we're probably maybe halfway there. We've got work to go, though, so there's a lot left to be done. So just as an overview, I think that summarizes kind of where we're at.
That was very comprehensive, and that was helpful. Thank you. So we'll move into issue 2 and talk specifically about developmental centers budget. And we're on page 7 of the agenda.
7, okay.
I'm sorry. I was moving right along. Do committee members have any questions or comments? Sorry, Mr. Chesbrough.
Well, I have a sort of a seemingly contradictory comment. On the one hand, I think the system and the people who depend on it is in dire shape, and we all should be very, very concerned about the future of the Lanterman Act and about the well-being of these folks who depend on these programs. On the other hand, I do want to compliment the director and say that I know she didn't take this job to dismantle these programs, and she and the other people are doing the best they can to try to figure out under these circumstances how to deal with what comes down from above, and are trying to be a buffer. And you've been, and I'll probably give you a few more pokes today as I have in the past, but you've been very responsive when we have asked questions or tried to direct things in a different way, and so I appreciate that, and we'll probably try to do some more of that today and in June. So, in May, I mean. Thank you.
Yes, ditto.
Thank you. So for the developmental centers, Madam Chairman and members, as I mentioned, we operate 4 developmental centers in 1 community facility, populations 1,737 as of last Wednesday. The governor's budget assumes $577 million, 296 general fund in the current year. That's a reduction of $8 million current year. One thing that's important is that the governor's budget does assume that $2.2 million in additional general fund would be needed due to a delay in the federal government coming out to certify our program behind the fence at Porterville. They did come out, and they did recently issue a response to us where they did not want to certify the program. We are in an appeals process. I have to say it's going to be an uphill battle. The budget in the current year assumed $13 million in savings related to it. We'll keep pushing, but I think it's going to be a challenge. They weren't enamored with the fact that there was a fence and a few other security things that I'm not sure that are fixable from the perspective of what they need. Yeah, the developmental center population currently is about 36 people over what the budget estimated. 25 of the individuals are at Lanterman. The placements out of Lanterman, which we'll talk about in just a minute, have been a little bit slower than anticipated. It does include 5,570 positions, no change from what was enacted. In the budget year, the budget for the developmental centers is $559,284 general fund. It's a reduction of $18 million. It includes $24.5 million decrease associated with staffing, and the population would go down to an average pop of 1,533, a reduction of 230 residents, and a reduction of 317.5 positions. So the next issue that was mentioned in the agenda was to talk about where we are with Lanterman. We are about 18 months into the closure of Lanterman. The actual approval occurred with the signature of the budget in 2010, and that was a late budget that year. It was October, I think. So when we announced the closure, there were 401 residents at the facility. As of last Wednesday, again, we get our pop-up dates every Wednesday. There were 279 individuals. That included 7 who were out at a subacute hospital, but we still count them within our population because they've not yet been placed. The POP is down by 122, and we have 98 consumers who have transitioned into the community from Lanterman Developmental Center. 89 of them transferred into existing community care facilities that had space available at the time. We did have our first person move into an SB 962 home, and we've got more coming online, so we're real excited about that. And we've had a couple of people move into their own homes with supported living. Since July of 2011, there have been 153 pre-placement visits where we've taken consumers to the community to visit their new homes. And we've had 632 provider visits where the new providers in the community have come in to get to know the consumer, to work with the staff, to understand what the needs are of the consumer before they move. The staffing at Lanterman remains consistent with licensing. We've had 305 employees separate as of February. The clinic opened at Lanterman, the healthcare clinic. We've had 10 people that have used it. Right now, today, we have no additional funding or staffing related to the clinic. The doctors and nurses providing care right now to the people who live there have been serving the 10 that have come in. They've all been former Lanterman residents. I think the usage of the clinic's going to be very different because the biggest usage at Ag News was sedation dentistry, and Lanterman has never provided sedation dentistry. They've always contracted out for it, so it's not a service that we have available there. So I anticipate that we may see less usage at the Lanterman Clinic than we actually saw at the Ag News Clinic. MOUs have been entered into with all the bargaining units regarding the state staff and the community program. So all of the bargaining units have agreed, and all of the staff have been alerted about the program. We've held one vendor fair at the facility so that the vendors can become familiar with the staff. So far, we do not have any employees who are working in the community as a state staff in the community. The program is very similar to what we had at Ag News. The only difference is in the authorization for the closure of Lanterman. The program sunsets 2 years after the last resident moves from Lanterman. I do think that we'll see the usage go up when the providers start coming in and working with the staff and become familiar with the expertise of the staff, and the staff become familiar with and comfortable with the provider. I think just like we saw in Ag News, there'll be more interest on behalf of both of them. One of the issues that we will talk about as in terms of the challenges, though, has been the rates, and particularly the 4.25% rate reduction, which I'll come to in a moment. In terms of new resources in the community, there, in addition to what was already there at the point that we started closure, there are 14 new homes that are available with 52 beds. 30 of them are filled. We have 12 homes that will be licensed by June of this year. We have another 70 to 100 beds coming online in 2012. So everything's now at the peak of ramping up for the additional resources, because they used the resources that were already in the community for 89 placements already. So things are moving forward. The committee asked that I talk about challenges. I just mentioned a minute ago one of the challenges having to do with the state staff program.
Are you moving, Madam Chair, moving from Lanterman to the general route?
No, I'm still in Lanterman, but
okay.
I think that's my next.
I want to be sure before you leave Lanterman I have some
make
questions.
sure I got my, yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. I gave you a chance to get your drink of water, though.
That works well. That works well. So I'll just go back on the challenges and start a second. As I mentioned, we're about 25 placements behind. The January budget assumes that between the current year and the budget year, we'll have 180 placements versus what we had originally thought of 200. And part of it is because these resources are coming online right at the change of the fiscal year. We think there'll be a lot of movement over the next 6 months in terms of all of the resources being available. As I mentioned to you before, 18 months ago is when we actually started. Unlike with Ag News, before they ever submitted the plan to the legislature, all of the stakeholders had met. They'd come together. There was like 18 months to 2 years of work that happened before the plan ever came. So when the plan was adopted, they were ready to immediately implement. Unlike in this situation, we had not done that when the plan came forward in April, and so a lot of the work began after that. So I think we saw a little bit slower start at the beginning, but we are seeing a number of changes. We've had all of our work groups have met that and have been very supportive in terms of the transition, and we've tried to address a number of issues, although there'll be more. One of the things we've always talked about that's a big difference between us, this closure and the Ag News closure, is that in Ag News we had $100 million state housing bond money that we don't have here. So what we've done is we've said we're not asking for additional resources, but it's going to mean that we're going to take several years worth of community placement money, target it towards the closure, and that has also been a bit of a challenge, trying to make sure we had all the money in the right years for the right house, when you're going to buy it, when you're going to remodel it, etc. We've had 10 primary regional centers with the closure of Lanterman versus 3, and I think that's also been a bit of a challenge. It's been harder to coordinate. We're all the way from the Grapevine to the Mexican border is the area where placements are occurring, where the families live, and so it's a very large area that's very expansive, and obviously a number of challenges that come with that. Just the visits alone, as I mentioned before, the staff go with the consumer on the visits, and they train the staff in the home, like how to position consumer Terry, how to feed consumer Terry so that she doesn't choke, what are the challenges with her, and those visits may be happening down in San Diego versus, in the case of Ag News, it was all contiguous. So we're geographically spread out, which has created another challenge, I think, overall. One of the early issues that came up, and we've been working with the families in the regional centers and us, we have regular conversations, and we have meetings either by phone or in person monthly with regional center directors to talk about what's going on. And one of the early challenges had to do with when families wanted to transfer between regional centers. Some of their loved ones have been at the developmental center for a very long time, 20, 30, 40, 50, keep going, 60 years. And so they may have moved in that time frame, or they may want their loved one to live somewhere else. So the regional centers did come together and enter into an MOU having to do with transfers, and I think that addressed a lot of concerns and angst for some of the families. One of the issues we are faced with is the 962 homes are typically 5-bedroom homes, and in Los Angeles, finding a single-story 5-bedroom home without a pool has been a challenge, or a home large enough to make it into a 5-bedroom home has been a single-story home has been a bit of a challenge, and so regional centers have had a little difficulty trying to locate some of the homes, obviously, in that area. As I mentioned, providers have been a little hesitant in hiring some of the state staff. I think part of it's the familiarity and getting used to and working with them. But another challenge has been the 4.25% payment reduction. The statute does authorize the department to provide a health and safety waiver if the health and safety needs require a higher payment. What it doesn't do is allow us to give a provider waiver. So it's been a little bit of a challenge. In the case of Ag News, everybody had moved before the payment reduction took effect. And so we had just assessed all of their needs. We knew what their needs were, and their needs had been funded. In this case now, we can provide the payment reduction before they move, but we can't do it before you identify the consumer and their needs. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge, I think, as well. So if the 4.25 sunsets, that'll resolve itself, so hopefully we can get through that. Also, we had NIMBY issues. We've had one home in particular in San Gabriel where there has been significant opposition to the home and people living in their community. The city council has had meetings, and I don't think the community's really supportive at this point, although it's a very nice home, and I think at this point they're still moving forward in getting it ready. But that's the only one where we've had real significant challenges. But at the developmental center, we've had a couple of challenges. One is at Ag News, we kept consolidating the living units, so every time they got small, we just kept moving them together, and I think we moved people too much. So we're trying not to move people as much, but we still are going to need to consolidate. We just can't plan when a person on this living unit's moving versus a person on this one, so we have to kind of bring them down slowly. The consolidation of living units is a big concern to some of the family members, and you may hear that today. I do think that, we've been a little slower. We're down by about 25 of where we thought we should be as of this date, although we do expect a fair number of placements between now and the end of the year. And we've got close to 100 beds coming online by the end of 2012. So I think we're really ramping up, and we're going to have a challenge of trying to do all those visits and get everything organized as we move forward. So I think at a high level, And I don't know if you want me to stop there or go into the enhanced staffing and then stop. It's also Lanterman.
That's your preference.
Or why don't you complete Lanterman before I go into the questions?
That's fine.
I'll wait.
Okay. The committee asked me to also talk about the request in the governor's budget is for an additional staffing of 28 positions and 5 individuals who are in our blanket. They've been created that way. They're the OT-PT staff. And the request is to keep these positions. They're not new positions. They're positions that would be going away as the population goes down. When we put forward the original closure plan, we had indicated in there, again, we didn't need new resources, but we did need to keep some of them. These are the staff that we believe that we need in order to be able to accommodate all of the visits. Each consumer goes on 4 or 5 visits to the community before placement. And every time they go with staff from the facility. One of the big things is for us to be able to staff and to train their new providers. You know, make sure that we have a knowledge transfer. We also go out after placement and make sure that everything's okay. We follow up, and if there's any emergencies, we're there. And if there's any crisis, they could always have someone come back to the facility if need be. So we stay in regular contact post-placement as well to make sure we address any concerns as we move forward. So the positions that we're requesting, 10 of them are direct nursing, and that is as a result of the units consolidating slower than we thought. So this is actually direct care nursing staff. The second is positions that are associated with the transition in placement, which I just mentioned to you as well. And this includes things like the visits, but it also includes people that can modify the wheelchairs before they go out to make sure that everything's in place. Many of the people that we serve have individually handmade wheelchairs that are made to deal with their specific medical issues. It also has to do with their feeding and making sure everything is ready and training people on that. So it's a lot assisted technology as well. The request does include administrative staff that are required for under licensing to maintain and handle health records and what we need to do in transitioning of that. We do have staff that are needed to make the physical moves of the individuals, and we are asking for somebody to coordinate at headquarters. In Ag News, we had an individual that coordinated everything, both the developmental center and the regional center side, and right now we don't have that, and we're a bit strained to do that, especially as things start to pick up. And the last thing is for the community state staff and people working in the community that remain as state staff. We need somebody that has to coordinate all their personnel activity because they remain state employees, and we have to coordinate the separation of all the employees, their personnel actions, so whether they retire, whether they cash out, all of the stuff that goes with that. So I think I'm at the end of Lanterman.
Madam Chair,
Please, Mr. Gasparro.
I have several questions. First of all, you said that 305 staff have left, but not one of them has transitioned as part of the staff in the community program. And my select committee held a hearing, and I know we talked about it in the previous budget subcommittees, about the importance to consumers, the relationships between individuals and their staff, also the investment in training and knowledge that the staff had was very valuable and could be made use of, and yet it doesn't seem to be happening. So I wanted to drill down a little bit and try to figure out, to the extent you can give us some insight about why we haven't been able to do better at taking advantage of that.
Sure. I think a number of things. Number one, we needed to enter into the bargaining unit agreements before that could happen. All that's taken place. We have staff that are very interested in doing it. We don't have providers that are interested in hiring them yet. And that, I think, is the bigger issue. And I think it's, you know, the providers have been challenged with the budget situation, whether it be the 4.25, which, again, if it's a health and safety, we could waive, whether it be the median rate, whether they're actually acquiring the property themselves versus us acquiring it. So I think a lot of what we need to do is outreach to providers. I don't think we have a lack of staff interest, and we're ready to go.
Is there anything we can do to further incentivize it or make it more attractive to the providers?
They want money.
Get the rate back.
Yeah. If the 4.25 sunsets, I'm hoping that that'll work. But, it's a couple providers that didn't get impacted by the 4.25 in the community that did get a health and safety exemption actually discontinued use of a number of the state staff. So I don't know if it's just the economy, but it's been very successful where the state staff have worked in the community. And we do in Los Angeles, in many of the classifications, the state payment is comparable to what the rate is for the employees in the community.
Well, and counterbalancing a lot of what you said about the difficulties of providing the service is that real estate values are at an all-time low in our lifetimes in terms of so it's a fire sale, and so there's a whole other element of cost that seems like it should be
going down,
very affordable right now, and make it more make providers more able to be in the business if they're entering into new services. Now some people also may be stuck in underwater mortgages, I recognize, but it does seem like somebody entering into a new operation to serve this population of people that are leaving should be in an advantageous situation as far as property right now.
I think that's true as well, Assemblyman Chesborough. The other thing that I think is important is the placements that have happened to date have been placements that were in existing homes with existing staff, where they had beds available. We're just now starting. We've only had a few placements into the new homes. And we've had, like I said, the first 962 home just opened. We have one person that's residing there now. We've got a couple of other new homes. The majority of the homes are just now starting to come online, and so we're hopeful that they will hire the staff. And in cases where the homes have been acquired, that's not a cost to the provider.
And so what's your anticipation in terms of, I was glad to hear that one 962 home is happening, but that's a very small start.
I think
what's your
there's
anticipation?
14, if I remember correctly, 962 homes anticipated that are in the works, and we've got more coming online. It's either 13 or 14.
Well, just to reiterate, I had a chance to tour the homes over in Santa Clara Valley and see, what a opportunity for consumers to thrive. And now there's independent body of evidence that they are also cost effective, and so we really should be doing everything we can. And I want to provide as much encouragement as I can to. For us to be taking advantage of that program. It's worked so well in the Bay Area, and we're very hopeful that it can be as successful in Southern California.
Yes.
The other area of concern is what is being done to preserve community placement of friends groups, because that was another thing that we discussed and we heard from the families and from the clients themselves would be very important. As you indicated, some of these people have been living in the center for many decades, and they have long-standing relationships with others. And I know sometimes they have different levels of disability, and that may complicate
different needs,
putting them in the same housing. But I'm curious if you could talk about what the challenges are there and what your projections might be about whether we can do a little better job of accomplishing that.
I think that we currently have families who ask that their loved ones live together, that's occurring, and I think that it's working really well. We also have families that are asking to do that in homes that are opening up. That became one of the issues when we looked at the transfer between regional centers. That was one of the reasons that came up, and I think the fact that the regional centers now have an MOU where they're allowing for the transfers to happen, you're going to see more of that. The key at this point is we're coming into a period where the properties are all coming online, not all, but a large bulk of them, and now the coordination's really important to figure out where the families can live together. I think you'll hear today from some families where they have chosen a home where they can live with other people that they wanted their loved one to live with. The challenge will be when we get late into the process, when there aren't that many placements remaining, then I think we're going to face more difficulty. I think in terms of the 962, we've, with 14 of them times 5 roughly, and I can't do that in my head right now, 70. Is that it? No, 70. So we're about at the point where you have people that have enduring medical needs. We have a lot of individuals with significant behavioral needs that are at Lanterman, and we typically don't place them in a 962 home where you have people that are much more fragile. So you do have that issue. But I think that the regional centers, all of us working carefully and closely together, and the families indicating early on who they want to live with to the regional centers is going to be imperative now that we're starting to have the capacity available.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I'm looking forward. I hope that there are indeed family members here, and we can hear some of their experiences today, so find out from their perspective how things are going.
I agree. A couple quick questions for me on the 962 homes. You said that there are 14 kind of online coming up. How many do you think you'll need in total to manage the entire eligible caseload, if you will? I just need I don't have a sense of what the entire universe is to get a sense of how far we are on the spectrum, how close we are to.
I think we're pretty close because a lot of the population is not those needing enduring medical care. There are individuals that may have more behavioral related issues, and the 962 homes are for higher nursing level.
Right.
I mean, give or take, I think we're in the ballpark with the 14
It's about
coming.
the whole universe.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by your comment about the one home where you've had NIMBYism issues.
I think that's not a 962 home.
Oh, okay, I missed that.
Oh, it is not a
It's
960.
not.
It's a specialized residential home. And it is one we're bringing online for Lanterman, but it's for people with behavioral.
Okay, now that makes more sense. I couldn't quite figure out so you go through the typical kind of public notification process as you do for any licensure of any facility.
The licensure process is this: we're licensed as a community care facility versus a health facility, and so we go through the community care licensing. One of the things that worked really well in Ag News, and we've really, I think the regional centers are trying to emulate, as are the providers, is the providers and the regional centers worked with the communities as well. This property that, in particular, that was of concern as soon as it was acquired, the community became aware of it and has been alarmed before the ink was dry on the purchase. So, and they have a very organized community. I don't think the community in total is in opposition, but a large number of people have been.
Please.
Can I jump in and ask, is anybody raising the legal issues about the ability to discriminate against having people with disabilities living in their community? Actually,
Disability Rights California participated in the city council meeting, and there was a lot of discussion at the city council meeting. The city council.
I'm not a lawyer and I'm no expert, but I have a very strong impression that under our civil rights laws that people who are different than we are have a right to live next door to us.
Thank you. And just to follow up, I want to thank you for the work you're all doing and trying to navigate a ongoing tough situation with our budget. You made reference to the challenge of finding homes in Los Angeles that meet the criteria 5-bedroom, and it sounds as though for safety reasons they can't have a swimming pool. Is that accurate?
For safety reasons, they're not going to be able to be licensed if they have a swimming pool. We had one property where, after a lot of strong-arming me, it was cheaper to fill the pool in.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there an option to cover it and make it safe and
we
meet
did
some
do that
standard?
in the case of one property, but we've really been pushing on, in particular, the nonprofit housing organizations to find ones without the pool, so we're not spending
you don't have
the
to
money
deal with that
fill it in.
problem.
But we did, in one case, fill it in.
Thank you.
My arm's still broken, but and I still whine about it, as you can tell.
Questions of committee members? Shall we move on to the LAO? Any comments? Either on this presentation, I'm sorry I didn't call on you for the opening piece, so if you have any comments with regard to the director's initial presentation on the status quo of the department, please feel free.
LaShawn Francis, LAO. On the opening piece, I think it's important to recognize that the department's spending has remained relatively flat over the past few years, despite the fact that they have increased caseload and utilization. And I just think that's an important note to remember. As far as this previous conversation, we'll review the OSE audit when it comes out in May and have any comments for me revise.
And any questions from finance? Great. With that, we'll move into public comment. Again, on the DC-related subject specifically, please. We'll ask members of the public who choose to comment to line up on the far left-hand side.
Evelyn Abu Hassan with Disability Rights California.
Hang on one quick second. I'm sorry. I just want to give people opportunity to queue up, to give me a sense of how many people it is. If you just give us one quick second. Remind members of the public that we'll give each member 2 minutes to comment. And we've got a clock. And I'll give you a signal when your time is coming up close. Thank you very much. First witness.
Evelyn Abu Hassan with Disability Rights California. We've provided extensive comments in writing both to your staff and to the committee today, so I'm going to keep my comments fairly short. We do support the closure of Lanterman, of course. We do support the expansion of the 962 homes. We do urge the department to have a targeted CPP plan that allows for additional funds as necessary so that individuals who are currently at Lanterman can all be moved out by the end of fiscal year 2013. Thank you.
Next witness, 2 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Dwight Hanson on behalf of the California Disability Services Association. We also support the closure of not only Lanterman but all the rest of the developmental centers as well. Let me put a little perspective on what we're talking about here. A lot of the conversation, a lot of the questions sound as if the community is static and we're trying to make the community able to receive a couple hundred new people. I want folks to understand there are 6,600 new people that will enter into this system this year. That's more people by many times that are in the developmental centers. Within the existing population who have never been a developmental center, there are hundreds and thousands of people who will no longer be children but will move into community housing. The community is constantly accommodating individuals with needs. We are making this way more difficult than it needs to be. Yes, we need to develop 962 homes. Yes, we need to develop medical services homes. But a lot of the folks in the developmental centers are just like folks who have never had a DC address. And we need to do a better job of resource development within the community in order to accommodate those folks. You are being placed in a very difficult position, it seems to me, budgetarily, with a false sense that the DCs are a necessity versus the community, and it's just so difficult to make it happen. Let me put the numbers in front of you. This year, the average per person cost in a developmental center will be $323,000 a bed. $323,000 a bed. You're being asked to approve a budget for the budget year, which will have an average per person cost of $364,000 a bed. In other words, the per person cost is $41,000 higher. For fewer people, the DC caseload is going down by 12%. Their budget is only going down by 2%. I doubt very much if the needs of the consumers living in the DCs have risen to make it reasonable to assume that we should be spending $41,000 more per person. I think that's a bad situation that you're into here, and I think we need to close these things down. The last piece I would make, too, from a positive perspective, is that those developmental centers represent an asset owned by the state of California. They are a place where people live. They are a place. They're not a program. The programs can exist anywhere in the community. These are places. Rather than going out for housing bonds and other sorts of things, we ought to be finding a way to capture the value of that real estate. Whether we do revenue bonds, we sell, we lease, whatever we do to create a revenue stream that can be used to provide housing for the folks that are going to come out. There's no reason at all why we ought to burden an already overburdened special needs housing fund in the community when the state is sitting on an asset that can in fact be liquidated in some fashion to pay for those housing. So we would urge us to use that, urge the state to use those resources to provide those housing stock going forward.
If I could just respond to briefly. I am sure there's someone within the sound of your voice who is looking at those properties. I don't think it's safe to assume that there would be any kind of guarantee that if those properties were liquidated, that the funding would come directly into providing services. It would get sucked into the black hole called the general fund.
We're very aware of that.
Perfectly frank.
That's why my organization is sponsoring legislation to begin working on that issue right now.
Voila. Okay. I think the other issue is, I hear you loud and clear. It was a point made by you and others last year this time in the budget hearing. And I'll just speak for myself. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I am clear that what we're talking about, what we spent time talking about in terms of current residents in the centers, is a subset of the greater population. The time we are spending in these budget hearings talking about this transition is really wanting to make sure that the transition happens in a humane, safe, appropriate way for the residents. I don't want you to assume that because we're spending an inordinate amount of time talking about this transition, that that's the only focus. Again, the focus of the subcommittee is to really pay attention to what's in the budget bill itself and don't therefore connect unconnected dots, suggesting that we don't get the complete picture in terms of the complexity and the larger, if you will, population impacted by these programs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wouldn't suggest that the time the committee is spending is at all difficult. The difficult timing is how many years it takes to shut these facilities down.
I got it.
And so in the community, we have folks with special needs who have to work into a home where the staff has to learn how to feed them,
right,
how to position them,
right,
how to move them. It happens every day in the community for hundreds and hundreds of people. And yet the department is sending staff from the developmental centers out to, quote, train the community staff, all these sort of things. None of that happens for the thousands of people who are not in the developmental centers.
Gotcha.
So all I'm suggesting is it can be done in a more efficient way. This is being done in a very bureaucratic fashion and in a state-run and operated fashion that simply is not necessary or needed. I'm sure there are people out here with broken wheelchairs who would love to know that if they lived in a developmental center, they would have a custom-made wheelchair.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. Next witness, please.
I will do my very best, Miss Mitchell. This is Rick Hodgkins. Now, being a regional center client all my life, you might wonder why I'm up here on this particular issue. I've never lived in a D.C., but I've lived in a facility similar to a D.C. It was a school in Fremont run by the state of California for blind children, the California School for the Blind. And because I've been verbally, in some cases physically and emotionally abused by staff there since I left there, I have continued to talk trash about that place, even in an email to my service coordinator at Alta and even to our consumer advocate, because I was telling them about some of the abuses, like being forced to walk around in a big, not walk, but run around in a big circle until I can outrun the counselor who told me to do it. If that's not cruel, I don't know what is. The other thing I wanted to point out is someone mentioned that in Los Angeles it's very difficult to find a house without a pool. I would suggest to you that if that is an issue, two things. What if the consumers want to go swimming? And the other thing, okay, if I can finish, I don't have much time. Thank you. Not trying to be rude. The other thing is, if you have issues with licensing with regards to a pool, I'll tell you what you can do, because again, the consumers do want to go swimming. I can understand why everyone responded. And that is, you build a fence around the pool. That solves your licensing issue. And the other thing, if we could close the developmental centers and do it right, we could put back services that we have lost in the community. Thank you, and I will be back a second time to discuss regional center issues when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Hi, my name is Connie Lapin. I'm here on behalf of the Autism Society of LA and as a mother. My son is 44 as of Saturday. And the reason I came up to speak on this issue is that he has been severely impacted by autism. He has medical issues and post-traumatic stress, and has been living in supported living for over 17 years. And I don't see it as an option presented enough. And I didn't get supported living when I first learned about it. I thought, oh, you have to be really have a lot of abilities, so that you didn't need a lot of personal support. And it's actually turned out to be the opposite. Because if you think of putting somebody who's severely impacted in a place with 4, 6, 8 people just like that person, it turns into a nightmare, and we've lived it. So I want to ask that supported living be an option and that families know about it. And there needs to be wage parity. We had a lawsuit years ago called Sanchez to make wages attractable. I just came up with a new word, attractive, so that people would make it a career path. And I do understand the fear of families moving, but I really want them to know about supported living also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Thank you. My name is Jimmy Smith. I'm here to speak about my sister Susan, who has been a resident at Latterman Developmental Center for 45 years. I live close to the Mexican border, Terry. And by the way, well, we'll get to that. The closure of Latterman was opposed by a vast majority of families, but at least we took comfort in the department's assurance that the closure would mirror and build upon the successful closure of the Agnews, which was completed just a few years earlier. In January of 2011, 19 of the family members traveled to the Bay Area to meet with the Agnews families and toured several of the homes that were developed for the Agnews movers. We were genuinely impressed by what we saw and the stories that we heard. And I must say now, Assemblyman Cheeseborough, thank you very much for engaging yourself. You really showed and demonstrated that you are not only a very wonderful guy representing our families, but you put a lot of thought process into developing homes that are desperately needed. I go on, but as the closure of Latterman now enters into its third year, we're becoming increasingly concerned that many of the policies that contributed to the successful Agnews closure are not being fully implemented at Latterman. We have raised 3 specific concerns to the department in a formal letter dated the 15th. These concerns focus on ongoing 4.25% reduction for service providers, the utilizations of Latterman staff in the community home, and the manner into which the community homes are funded during this startup process. We thank the department for their response, but we feel that this really does deserve further clarification. I can speak directly to all of you about my sister's experience. She's severely retarded. She's got an IQ of about 12. She has been cared for by Latterman staff for all her life. It doesn't make any sense to me that providers would not welcome the opportunity to have a staff member at Latterman that's familiar with my sister and many of our loved ones not come into the community as continuing with even if they're retired, these people are so passionate that they would continue their service. They're dedicated. It's a thankless job. And not only that, but just the simple logical observation is they know our loved ones so well.
10 seconds, please.
All right. Well, given with the time limitation to the 2-minute testimony, I've brought some of other members to continue. So thank you again for this great opportunity.
Appreciate it. Next witness, please.
Hi, my name's Joe Walters. My son Cameron is 35 years old. He's been at Latterman for about 22 years. Cameron is as autistic as they come. He's also retarded. He cannot talk. And as if this were not challenging enough, Cameron is also blind now. He wasn't born that way. He became blind by hitting himself in the head with such force that he detached his own retinas. Yet that barely scratches the surface of Cameron's behavior problems. I'm very concerned that as Cameron is moved out of Latterman and into the community, that the DDS is providing adequate money to take care of him in a home. The funding rates for Lanham movers are currently being negotiated under the constraints of the 4 1/4% rate reduction for service providers. The department has expressed optimism that this rate reduction will be lifted in this coming fiscal year, and we certainly hope that this will be the case. All Californians with developmental disabilities have suffered for too long due to these reductions, and it's time to give the department the resources it needs to adequately serve this increasingly vulnerable population. Ag news movers were exempted from that reduction thanks to this health and safety waivers that were granted proactively by the department. This was done because individuals who had lived most of their lives in a DC were deemed at risk until the safety of their transition was assured. Our family members are now going through the exact same process, but without the protection of the waivers. Are they somehow less at risk than the ag news movers were? I would assert that since they are just the beginning of the transition process, they are more at risk, especially since their service rates are being negotiated at a lower rate than those of the ag news movers. The department has indicated that they will consider waivers on a case-by-case basis, but that policy represents a reaction to potential harm instead of protection from
15 seconds.
Therefore, we ask this committee to encourage the department to proactively grant waivers to Lanham movers, at least until their safety in their new community settings has been assured. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, please. 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Joni Pepper, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today regarding what I think is a very important component of the Lanterman Closure Plan. I'm the mother of a very dear 54-year-old disabled gentleman who resided at Ag News, D.C. for 30 years prior to its closure. The families of the Lanterman residents are now facing the same situation. I have walked in their shoes, and I know exactly how concerned they are about the transition of their loved ones into the community. My son now resides in a wonderful 962 home. Thank you, Assemblyman Chesbro. As many of you know, there were several important pieces of legislation passed that resulted in the wonderful homes in which the Ag News residents now reside. They should serve as a model for any future moves. AB 1378 provided state employees the ability to work in these residences. Of all the issues that were addressed in our closure plan, this was without a doubt the most essential piece of the package. Granted, there are wonderful caregivers in the community, but the needs of our loved ones in the developmental centers are unique. The DC staff has had years of experience caring for our special children and understands their particular needs. Moreover, the residents have developed a feeling of comfort and safety in the hands of the state staff that is absolutely necessary to their feeling of well-being and sense of security. The success of the transition of the Lanterman clients into the community relies very heavily upon the care and guidance of the state caregivers with whom they are so familiar.
15 seconds.
I cannot imagine what would have happened had the Ag News movers not had this extremely important plan in place when they started their new lives. A combination of state employees and community caregivers is the answer for success. The state staff would be the most qualified to be home administrators, and they can train and mentor community caregivers to help them fully understand their roles in caring for the clients in the most meaningful way possible. It is the essence of a successful transition. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Gail McHugh, and my son Scott is 47 and has lived at Lanterman for 34 years. Scott has Cornelia de Lange syndrome, is profoundly mentally retarded, has severe behaviors, medical issues, and is nonverbal. Without a doubt, the most consistent message we have heard from the Ag News families has been the importance of state staff accompanying their loved ones into their new community-based homes. These staff members have dedicated their careers to working with this population and are some of the most qualified professionals in their field. In many cases, they have worked with certain individuals for years and can interpret even the most subtle forms of nonverbal communication. Their participation in the transition process is absolutely essential. The department has indicated that monies are being made available to continue the state staffing program that was so instrumental at Agnews, but to date, not a single Lanterman employee has participated in this program, despite the fact that nearly 100 clients have already been moved into the community. Unlike Agnews, the state staffing program for Lanterman now includes a sunset date of 2 years after the facility closes. This is clearly a disincentive toward Lanterman staff accepting new community-based employment, even though the department has stated that the overall program is cost neutral. We therefore urge the community to allow the department to remove this artificial sunset date and thereby retain the level of care staff that is so vital in ensuring that Lanterman movers will be successful in their new community placements. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, please. 2 minutes.
Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for allowing me this opportunity. My name is Tom Emerson. My sister Betty Emerson was placed at Lanterman at 6 years old. She's resided there as her home for 50 years. I'm also a PCC board member. When the closure of Agnews was completed in 2009, 109 Agnews employees had transitioned into the community with them. But again, as you've heard, not a single employee from Lanterman has participated in this program thus far. The department has indicated that the program is dependent upon the cooperation with regional centers and their service providers. Many of our families have already begun the transition process with the expectation that the state staffing program will be implemented in accordance with their loved one's placement. However, many of our families have been told directly by their regional centers that they do not intend to utilize the state staffing program because of the funding rates, the negatively impacted 4.25% reduction. So there appears to be some level of disconnect between the department's stated policy and the regional center's implementation of that policy. Given that the department's current budget request allocates money towards the state staffing program for Lanterman, we respectfully ask the department to disclose the following information with the understanding that such numbers can only be projected as estimates. Upon the final closure, how many Lanterman employees are expected to be deployed into the community? Number 2, what portion will be allocated toward behavioral homes and what portion toward medical homes? Number 3, which regional centers will participate and to what extent? And number 4, what are the expected timelines? And in closing, I'd like to quote Albert Einstein. He said that all meaningful and lasting change starts first in your imagination and then works its way out. Imagination is more important than knowledge. I would encourage everyone here in trying to find creative ways using their imagination to work within this budget that they don't forget our disabled. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate you. Next witness, please. 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brian Boxall. My brother David was an Agnews mover, and he's very successful in his new home. I'm here today to read a letter on behalf of Robert Hazard. He testified on Monday for the Senate, but was unable to be here today. My name is Robert Hazard. I am the co-conservator and brother of my younger sister, Susan, who is essentially a 2-year-old in the body of a 60-year-old woman. Susan is developmentally disabled with a profound intellectual disability. Besides being diagnosed with profound mental retardation, she also suffers from a depressive disorder coupled with an impulse control disorder. With the help of our regional center, the regional project, and our chosen provider, we have found a good home at a good price, good provider, and good housemates. Susan has lived with these women for decades, and they've become her family. Even though I live 50 miles from this home in Temple City, I agreed to its location primarily due to the close proximity to Lanterman and therefore the convenience for some state staff to commute and work there. I, as well as the 3 other families, want state staff as promised by the closure plan, and so does the provider, who has experienced the very successful usage of state staff with the Agnews closure. I've heard several times that the single most important factor in the success of the Agnews closure was the inclusion of the experienced state staff. The home is opening soon, and Susan's transition process is moving right along. However, we are hearing that the 2 regional centers involved are saying that there just isn't enough money available for the hiring of state staff. Therefore, I and the other families might refuse what would otherwise be our preferred option. We might have to start all over again. Who knows if we will be able to find the same compatible housemates and the other features of this house. With Susan's behavioral issues, this could also have a traumatic consequence and result in her regression. I've been told that because I feel strongly about the inclusion of state staff, Susan is being considered for exclusion from this home. If we lose this house, a good home and a good provider would remain empty, costing the state more money due to delays.
10 seconds, please.
All I'm asking for is the similar rights and provisions that made the Agnews community transition so successful. Thank you on behalf of Bob Hazard.
Thank you very much. Next witness, 2 minutes, please.
Dear Madam Chairman and members of the subcommittee, my name is Diane Allison, and I am here on behalf of my brother David Meyer, a longtime resident of Landerman State Hospital. My brother was committed in 1946 at the age of 17 as an immediate danger to himself. Completely autistic, profoundly asocial, and totally mute, even to painful stimuli, with an IQ of 9, my brother was nevertheless able to escape from any place, anytime, anywhere, and run until he fell off cliffs, he ran into traffic, he became entangled in barbed wire, and of course the authorities became involved. Now, no parent would have allowed their child to be committed to a state facility were there any other choice. However, even years later, Frank Landerman, who was instrumental in developing community homes, told my father, a fellow churchgoer, Mr. Meyer, your son needs to remain in a locked state facility. He needs the state hospital system. Now, my brother has been well cared for 66 years at Landerman, with its understanding professional staff and its spacious grounds where he can run if he escapes and not leave the premises. Were he to be transferred into a home in the community, his caregivers who understand him very well, despite his muteness and his inappropriateness, would have to cross-train with the new staff for as long as it takes. He has one caregiver, Maria, on the day shift who is just devoted. She says, David is my baby. But she states that she cannot transition out with him because at the end of 2 years, the state would terminate her. This is what she has been told, and she would lose her retirement and her medical benefits. Our family considers this a great tragedy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Carolyn. My sister is Teresa. She has been in Landerman about 20 years. I am her my mother recently passed, so I got this opportunity to see how hard some of these families who've been doing this for decades have worked for their families. I don't want to say a whole lot, but I have a couple of quotes I want to say to you. Number one, Aristotle has been quoted as saying you can judge a nation by the way it treats its most vulnerable citizens. A nation's greatness is measured by how it treats its weakest members, Mahatma Gandhi. Our society must make it right and possible for all people to be cared for. A moral test of a government is how the government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, needy, and the handicapped. Last speech of Hubert H. Humphrey. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. 2 minutes, please.
Hello, my name is Min Yi Chu. My daughter Nancy is 40 years old, and she has been a resident at Landerman for the past 35 years. In closing, we realize that this is a budget subcommittee and not a policy committee. We believe that the policies we have described have already been authorized and approved as part of the Agnews closure process. We simply ask this committee to ensure that they are adequately funded and implemented as they were at Agnews. The department deserves high praise for what they accomplished at Agnews California is perhaps the only state in the nation that has successfully closed a large state-operated facility while simultaneously creating comparable community-based services. Such a legacy should be built on, not scaled back. It will ultimately benefit many generations to come. We understand that in financial terms, the Lanterman closure must be accomplished efficiently. The department was wise not to attach an arbitrary deadline for closure, but neither should the deadline remain entirely open-ended. We strongly feel that investing in these policies now, especially the state staffing program, will ultimately shorten the process and make it more cost-efficient for the state and safer for the residents involved. We thank the department and the committee for listening to our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Next witness, please. And you have 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. I won't start you till you start.
My name is Deanna Gross, and I previously lived. I lived at a group home. It was a nursing home.
Yeah. 10 years.
For the last 20 years, I have lived on my own. And she wanted to say that she was placed in a nursing home at the age of 9. And in 1992, she moved into her own home. Did I get anything wrong?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm done with that part. Okay, my name is Jackie Dillard Foss, and I represent the California Supported Living Network. And I wanted to talk about, one is, I hear what Assemblymember Chesbrough was talking about with the 305 staff. STEP, the agency that I'm the CEO of, has 550 employees that have been impacted by the 4.25% reduction. But those same employees have also assisted over 30 individuals with significant behavioral challenges to live in their own home. They're individuals with all the labels. I was thinking it was rather ironic that next door they were taking up a bill about the R word. And as I look at the people, I see Deanna, and I see Jerome, and I see Atif, and I see all the people with all the labels, but they're able to live in their own homes. The other piece that I wanted to talk about is I was at all six of the stakeholder meetings. I stalked Terry Delgadillo. She enjoyed that. And when we were at Inland Regional Center, one of the interesting conversations that happened there was a provider who said they had homes that were ready, they had beds that were ready, they had families that were ready, they had consumers that were ready. They just didn't have a developmental center that was ready, and she didn't understand that. The second part that has been quite frustrating for the Supported Living Network, considering I hear the families talking about the NIMBYism and the behavioral challenges, is that Supported Living, I talked to a family after the hearing with Senator Liu on the abuses in the developmental center, and after I talked to that family member, she said Supported Living wasn't given as an option for her sister. And when I started explaining what supported living was and how it is flexible and tailored to meet their needs, she's like, why haven't I heard about this? So I just think we are moving forward. You are going to have folks with unique challenges. We need to start talking about supported living services. So that's it. I think I met my 2 minutes.
You did. You're a professional testifier.
I'm not trying to beat her.
Assemblyman Chest, 1 second. Yes, Mr. Chesbrough.
I just wanted to thank Deanna for being here and for reminding us of what people are capable of, and if we give them some independence and some support. So we really appreciate your testimony. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next witness, 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of California, and I'm also representing a collaboration of United Cerebral Palsy and the ARC. And I wanted to be just real clear, take a real quick second and say how, we have had a long history of support of closure of developmental centers and strongly believe that people do well and do better in the community. That's not a big surprise to any of my colleagues, friends here in the room. But what I have been struck with a little bit more this year is the tone of our discussion of the closure of developmental centers has been different than, as you know, in years past when it's been very rough, and we've fought very hard in our own community and created two sides. And although there are definitely still there are still a lot of hard feelings and there's a lot of work still to do, I think it's different now than it has been in times of in the 90s, I would say. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to find even more ways in the plan to work together, to find ways to bring the providers out more and talk more about what they have to offer and really get into that. Where my members are very concerned about transfer trauma. I think a lot of people are. We recognize that. So we really want to push the closure of the developmental centers, but at the same time, just as diligent, we want to say that this is an opportunity for us to really maybe beef this up and find ways to reach out to the community, and we'll offer that as well, Terry, that we'll do everything we can to increase that, but it is a good opportunity for us. And then in the end, or before I leave, I can't leave this opportunity. We're talking about the developmental centers, and my members are very preoccupied, very concerned with the latest stories of abuse. So we always would like to know if there's any updates on what has been going on. We take this extremely serious, abuse anywhere in the developmental centers and in the community, and we always want to hear, when we have this opportunity, to hear what's happened. And so if there is a chance for that, we would appreciate that as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next witness. And I'm going to ask the lady in the blue T-shirt. She's hearing impaired. Okay, is she going to interpret or is she going to testify? Oh, beautiful. I just want to make it clear that she's the last one in the line. That's all. I didn't want anybody else to add on. Thank you. Next witness, please.
My name is Terry DeBell. I'm co-president of the Parents Coordinating Council at Lanterman Developmental Center and also president of Cash PCR. I would like to respond to Tony's request for an update on the situation of follow-up on abuse and injuries in developmental centers. It certainly is a pertinent topic, and we are pleased that the response of the department began well before the recent media reports, and we urge everybody to read the DRC report on the entire subject of abuse and injuries. It never happens that somebody from developmental center gives a plug to a publication from DRC, not known to do puff pieces on developmental centers, but it is some information that affects everybody who cares about the system for people with developmental disabilities. But when the closure of Lanterman first came before this committee, we urged everybody to vote no. We knew that the extremely involved needs of our residents were going to be difficult and expensive to meet in the community. However, DDS and regional centers said that with the services and supports under the closure plan, like was used at Agnews, it could be closed. And so we are now 2 years into the process. 2 years ago, it would have been impossible to imagine how difficult this would be for everyone involved, for our residents, our families, staff, regional centers, providers, DDS. The challenges of closing a DC are almost indescribable, no matter what you may hear to the contrary. However, if we did not have the tools and the programs used in the Agnews closures and others that you heard about today, it would not simply be difficult, it would be impossible. We have heard back from a few families about their relatives who are now living outside of Lanterman. Similar to some Agnews movers, they are doing very well, which is a real tribute to their own super abilities, but also certainly due to a careful transition process and everyone working together and getting the services and supports that they need. We really thank the committee for your continued and vital support of this process and your interest in our residents.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, please. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
My name is Gabriella Owens. I have a brother who has been a resident of Lanterman for over 30 years, and Camarillo before that. Community placement has been tried for him before and has failed. He has a laundry list of diagnoses, but really I'm just here to say that it's the funding for the state staff, the ability to fund the full staffing of the home when the first resident moves in, and the waiver for the 4.5%, that from what I understand, having met in this last week with 4 different providers in the Central California area where we are interested in moving our brother, that this is specifically why they are not currently looking to hire state staff because of these funding problems. And this is crucial to the move. My cousin, who has had similar problems as my brother, did not survive a move from a government institution to private care, a community home. He died within months of being moved. And so we don't want that to happen with my brother. It's very important that the state staff who understand his needs goes with him, at least initially, to train the people who'll be caring for him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Hey, I'm Kelly Booker, and I moved here in 1989 to California and started supporting, advocating for disabled people at that time. I moved here from a state that was completely deinstitutionalized. They didn't have any state hospitals or anything like that. They hadn't for several years. At that time in '89, I was in here with the group talking about deinstitutionalization for California. These places are archaic. Somebody was saying that not very many states have closed down places like that. Almost all the states have. So it's not a hard thing. Let's close down those dinosaurs. Nobody should be warehoused where they live based on their disability. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Hello. My name is Nadia, and I have 2 points that I'd like to make. I am a caregiver for a developmentally disabled person, and I've had 5 years of experience, plus my brother as a family member who has a developmental disability himself. And from what I've seen and from the people I've worked with who've been in state institutions, what I've noticed is that once they get out into the community, there's a huge improvement, big time. And what I've observed is some of the behaviors that they've shown. And that shows that the state institutions aren't giving them the freedom that they should have under the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution guarantees us certain freedoms. So we should be providing our clients those freedoms. So please do close these institutions. I don't want to see this happening to my family members and the people that I work with as well. And we are all here to encourage the closing of those developmental centers. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much for the public comment. First, Chairman Blumenfield has the mic. Then we'll go to Mr. Chesborough. I know Ms. Grove has several questions of the department based on your opening overview statement. Okay, we'll start with the chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, stop down in this hearing as we have over 60 subcommittee hearings leading up to the May revise, and they're all extremely important. And I try to stop in on the different subcommittee hearings. I always have them on my television as I'm doing other things at my desk, and I was watching this and felt like I wanted to come down because it's such an important conversation that you're having, and really you've been having so many important conversations in this subcommittee. I want to thank you for that. But I also want to thank all of the folks who are here who've come up for it. In fact, I flew up on the plane this morning, and a number of the folks who are in the DD community were on the flight with me. We had a lot of conversation about this topic, and as well have had lots of conversation in my district office as well as the Capitol office, as I'm sure everyone on this committee and probably everyone in this body in the legislature has had, because these issues affect so many lives and the state role is so important. I mean, it's been very difficult the last several years, 4 years. We've been making just drastic cuts and trying to figure out how to deal with them in the way that least impacts the clients, and that's still the goal. And even though in this cycle we don't have new cuts, we're still trying to figure out how to deal with the triggers. So, the good news is last year we eliminated 75% of the structural deficit, but we still have a ways to go, and we still have a lot of challenges as a state. But I just wanted to, not just listen on the TV set, but come down here a little bit in person and thank all the folks who've come in and thank the committee for its hard work and continued work on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate that. Mr. Chesborough.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was very moved and touched by a lot of what was said here today. This is kind of a harsh way to put it, but there's a certain bait-and-switch character to the transitions between Agnews and Lanterman, in that the sense that Agnews had the time to do more planning and was at a better financial time. And so, but it was the basis that we built the confidence in the families at Lanterman that things could work. And I'm glad to hear some positive comments today, so it's not all like it's horrible. I'm not trying to indict it, but there's clearly some things that aren't working the way they have worked at Agnews. And I think we need to try to figure out why and what it is that needs to be done to fulfill that promise, because I really think in using Agnews as the example, we made a promise to the residents and their family members at Lanterman that there would be these available resources and supports, and many of them are available, but there's some things that have fallen down. I want to point out that while I recognize that there are challenges to the providers in the community and the challenge that was pointed out with finding the right type of housing, in Silicon Valley, housing is not easily available or economically available back then when the transition was happening for Agnews, nor is it today. And yet they were able to find the housing necessary to proceed with the 962 homes. And so I really think that we need to ask the department to redouble their efforts to make the staff and community program work, and to make the 962 homes a reality, and ask them what do they need to do that. Because remember, one of the reasons for closing Agnews is to make a more cost-effective system, and sometimes you got to invest money to save money. It's to be a more humane and better system for the clients, but it's also to do it in a more cost-effective fashion than we've been able to do in the institutions and hospitals. So I think we need to ask the administration and the department to redouble its efforts in those areas, and for you to tell us what would be needed to figure out how to make sure that this works, because it really is an investment process and not one that we can either, in all fairness to the residents and the families, cut short, nor from the standpoint of investment in the taxpayers does it make sense for us to not be providing the right kind of transition that was promised.
Madam Chair and Assemblymember Chesborough, I very much understand the concern. I think Agnews was a very, very successful transition. We did have a lot more time. The actual transition itself took many years even after the plan was approved, and buying the homes was what delayed the transition the most. We bought 60 homes over there as part of the housing bonds, and there were many times that the providers were ready to go. And one of the issues you heard just a little bit ago, the provider had hired staff and was ready to go, but the home wasn't ready to go, and so they kept the staff on. One of the issues that has come up as we look at Lanterman closure are the providers want us to start up and give them money for a long period of time without knowing when the house is going to come online. We're trying to manage the limited resources we have to make sure we're buying services. At the same time, we want them to start up and have the staff work with the consumer before they move into the community. So I think we're in a fiscally difficult time, but we're trying to make sure we manage the resources in a way that we can maximize that going to the actual consumer that's going to be making the move. I think there are some misconceptions that we've tried to address. One is that a state employee going to work in the community does not lose their job at the end of the 2 years when that program ends. They are a state employee just like any other state employee. So if they stayed at the facility, if they transferred to another state department, they have the same rights as any state employee. So we've had actually the one provider that's been talked about that hasn't yet hired because they're concerned about the salary. has laid people off that were employees, state employees. In the case of Ag News, those employees came back to us. They come back to us and they continue in their status, and they have the same seniority that any other state employee. And in many cases, these employees have worked for the department for a very long time. So I think that some of it is just getting the accurate information out. I think the other big thing is, the health and safety, and us providing those waivers in a timely manner. We can provide them before the person moves. It isn't that you have to wait and fail. You have to move and fail before you can get it. But we can't say if a provider comes in and says, I'm going to open this home and I want you to pay me a higher rate. Under the law, I don't have the authority to do that. I do think there are things like the state staff program sunsetting in 2 years. I do think that that is something where the state employees are probably a little hesitant because they're going to go to a job. 2 years goes by really fast. It's 2 years after the closure, after the last person moves. But in the case of Ag News, there's not a time limit. We started with 120 some odd employees in Ag News that went to the community, and we're down to 70. About 70 now. And those people have come, some of them have become employees of the provider and left state service. Some have come back to us. Some have retired. I do think, we've got challenges in moving forward. We're now at the critical path, and I think that's what you're hearing here. The families were many opposed at the beginning when we first announced closure. They, as someone mentioned, they've been working amazingly with everybody, even though they really don't prefer closure. It's much different than the hearings we had on Ag News. Much, much, much different. That being said, we're now at that transition point, and I think it's a challenge for everybody because the properties are now coming online, and it's now time when people will start making the move. And hopefully, we've got a big challenge ahead of us on the $200 million, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And I'm hoping that we can identify things that will allow some or all of the 4.25 to not continue. And if it does end in June, I think that's one of the major issues that you heard today. So I really hope, and I appreciate the ARC, indicating that they want to work with us to have their providers come. That would be wonderful, to get more providers that are interested. I think that'll be a big deal as well. But appreciate the support. I think we're going to need it as we go forward. I think the 962 homes are coming online. The majority of them have been purchased. I think we're short just a few being purchased at this point. So
would you, before we return to the overview, would you mind, because I don't want to lose it, a couple of members of the public asked for an update on the Office of Protective Services, and I know that was discussed at the pre-hearing. So would you mind giving us a quick update on that, and then we'll go to Ms. Grove's questions.
Sure. I just want to start by saying abuse, no matter where it occurs, whether it's in the community, which unfortunately it occurs frequently, whether it's in a developmental center, is not tolerated. And we take a very aggressive stance. We have a zero tolerance policy. If a consumer, a resident alleges that somebody abused them, we report that to public health licensing so that public health comes in and does an independent review of us to determine whether that occurred. And if they allege that a staff person abused them in any way, it could be verbal, it could be the staff person yelled at them, or it could be something further, we immediately remove that staff person from any contact with the resident and investigate. And if we find that to be true, we fire them, and we don't compromise. There were a lot of issues that came up having to do with our investigations. We've taken a very aggressive stance. First of all, the agency secretary has brought in an outside law enforcement expert that is reviewing our entire law enforcement system internally. He has already met with the executive directors of every developmental center. He has met with the commanders of the law enforcement at every developmental center. He's met with the chief of police. He's currently reviewing new protocols. As Ms. DeBell said, we've been doing a number of things over many years, and we had a national expert develop protocols for us on responding to and investigating incidents. Those protocols are completed, and the expert is reviewing them now. We also have training curriculum. We'll be retraining every one of our law enforcement personnel with those new protocols once he makes sure that there aren't any changes that he wants. We also asked Disability Rights California to come in and review our investigations totally independent of us and identify if if they saw any weaknesses in what we had done. And what they mentioned that they reported at the hearing is they actually found in most cases the investigations were very thorough and far more thorough than what they found in investigations of cases in the community. So I think we've got a big issue, no matter whether it's an individual with developmental disability or whether it's somebody that has any other type of risk, whether it be a mental health issue or a physical disability. I think people are at risk throughout our system and throughout our nation, and we've got to do everything we can aggressively. And if there are more recommendations, we look forward to working with the legislature to address any concerns we have. Disability Rights California made recommendations to us, which we are going to implement all of them, and we've already met with all the executive directors to go over those changes.
Sounds like a very comprehensive process, so I appreciate that. Any questions on this topic from members? Okay, moving on to Ms. Grove on the overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your indulgence because I'm kind of bouncing back and forth, and I do have to go back to the other committee, and I apologize, but I do have some questions because my main concern is in the private world, I sit on a lot of boards and commissions or boards that oversee adult daycare facilities and things like that, and alternative programs is what we call them. So I guess my concern is that when the legislature in its infinite wisdom cuts services like this, it always seems to impact the consumer or direct delivery of services. So I guess my questions along that line on the overview is on the issues, on issue 2, which is I guess what we're on, the average cost of serving persons in a state-owned or operated facility is much higher than the cost serving in similar persons within the community. For instance, that was made in a statement earlier that it's going from $323,000 per bed per year to $364,000 per bed per year, yet the DCs are losing 13% of their caseload, and but it's increasing per bed for the cost. So I guess that's a question. And then I also want the differential of what it costs to service someone in a facility. And I realize that there are a particular consumer that people believe that have to be maintained in a facility, whether it's behavioral or medical. I'm not sure. This is a new committee for me, and I'm learning it as fast as I can. But my concern is that just like the young lady who testified a while ago, she's out on her own, and that's what you want, is someone to be able to be out on their own and not be locked in some type of facility. So I guess I want to know the difference between the cost in using a state facility versus the community facilities. And then I guess the next question I had on that issue is that if you're losing 13% of your caseload in the DCs, why is the cost per bed going up, and why is the budget only down 3%? Because I think that we need to, in my opinion, make sure that every single dollar available without state bureaucracy and everything that's oversees it gets given to the people who give direct delivery of care to the individuals that we serve.
So, Assemblywoman Grove, let me try to answer the questions, and if I don't catch all of them, you can follow back up with me. First of all, you had asked about the average cost in the developmental center versus the average cost in the community. In the developmental center, we do have fixed costs that are required, as you're probably familiar based on your community involvement, that are tied to licensing. So we have to have a medical director. We have to have a pharmacy manager. We have to have a dentist. We have to have someone to make the electricity run. We have to make sure the water's clean. Those types of fixed costs. So when your population goes down, the average cost for your consumers go up because you spread those fixed costs across the population that remains, and you'll see that over the developmental center history. I think what's important is in the community is where we serve most of the people. We have about 250,000 people in the community. Half of them are children, and when you look at the children, almost all of them live at home. There's a small portion that don't. The majority of them live at home, so they're not getting residential care. So when you look, if you want to do a comparison, what we did is we looked at the consumers that moved out of Agnew's Developmental Center that now live in the community. And in specialized residential homes, on average, we spend $232,000 a year, and that's just for DDS costs. That doesn't include costs at Medi-Cal. That doesn't include in-home support services costs, which many of these people are not getting. But it doesn't include other types of generic resources because we're the payer of last resort. When you take somebody going into a 962 home, we're spending $256,000 a year on the individuals. Again, only the DDS cost. That doesn't include the cost. So what I think you hear sometimes is you spread the entire community cost over everybody, which are people who would never go into a developmental center. They're children that go to school, regular school, that live at home, that we may only provide casework services to. We may not be providing anything more than that, or if we are, it's very minimal in terms of the cost. So I think that when you do it comparatively speaking, we actually have people who move from Agnews, and we can compare those people to these costs. And again, 962 homes are $256,000 a year. Last year, on average, some of them were over $400,000. So some of them exceeded the cost in a developmental center. So I think when you look at that is a change. In terms of where people live, we want people to live in the least restrictive environment possible. And just in the last 5 years, the population in developmental centers has gone down 38%. So we've been decreasing quite rapidly. Unfortunately, Assemblywoman Grove, we are still getting 100+ people a year placed in. The community, for whatever reason, is unable to meet their needs in the community, and 100+ new people are coming into us every single year while we're placing over 200 a year. And so one of the things when we get to the budget talking about the $200 million, one of the things we talked with the stakeholders about during our work group meetings was, what is it that we need to be doing in the community so that these individuals can be served in the community so you don't need to be sending them into a developmental center? How can we do things differently? And, you know, many of the people have challenging needs that are coming into us. Some have been involved in the criminal justice system. You know, many of them, if not most, have behavioral or mental health issues. And so we've got to figure out, how do we do more in the community so people aren't coming to us, and then how do we look at the people that are living in the developmental centers and make certain that the least restrictive environment is provided. Everybody in the developmental center came to us as a result of a court order. The court has made a determination that at the time they looked, this person couldn't be served in the community. I think that's changing rapidly. You hear that even from the families. You listen to the families from Agnew's closure. They never thought the day would come when their loved one would be so successful in the community. But I think that it takes time, and it takes time building the facilities. And when we talk about a 962, it's a home. It's like where you and I live. They're beautiful homes where individuals live with 4 or 5 people together with supportive staff, but they look just like a home in the community. Supported living is an option. We had a few people from Agnews actually go into supported living, and I've been to supported living where they are serving people that used to live in a developmental center. Very, very successful. But there are some concerns from the families. They are unlicensed. Supported living is an unlicensed service provider, so some families are worried about that. We need to educate families more. I think that came up at our Senate hearing. We've already spoken with Ms. DeBell, who's the head of the Parent Association, and we're going to provide training at the parent meeting and also put stuff in their parent newsletter so that they know more about supported living as an option that's available to them. But it's very important, I think, that they understand all of the options that are available. And we want to see people live successfully in the least restrictive environment, and we have been actively pursuing options to do that.
Ms. Delgadillo, just as a quick follow-up before you move on to another subject perhaps, what's the plan on addressing the pipeline issue? If the ultimate goal is closure, we could be here 5 years from now saying, well, there are just 3 left and we're working on it, but 100 are coming in, as you're saying.
Actually,
what's the pipeline plan? When will that shut off?
They're not going into Lanterman. I shut that pipeline off a long time ago, but they're not going into Lanterman, but they are coming in, and they're coming largely into Porterville Developmental Center and into Fairview Developmental Center largely. But one of the things that we're looking at is trying to figure out, what do we know about them? And when we talked about the $200 million, I was going to talk more, but I can talk now, that we looked at all of the people referred to